So welcome. My name is Del Lowenthal. This is the SAFPAC Existential Analytic Training, and delighted that we welcome back Manu Bazzano. Manu's been with us almost from the start. He's been here at Arthur's Cafe in Wimbledon, or Wimbledon Park University, as it's sometimes called. Manu, I think you know, is a psychotherapist. He's a very well-known writer and an independent researcher. Manu's going to talk with us this evening about the skull beneath the skin, death, suicide, and existential therapy. Over to you, Manu.
Thank you, Dal. Lovely to be here. In one of the few places where existential therapy rhymes with critical thinking and with psychoanalysis, rather than being a small little dogmatic group. I want to dedicate this talk to the memory of what is to me the greatest thinker of last century, Gilles Deleuze, who, as some of you know, killed himself. He jumped out of a balcony. An act which wasn't, can people hear me? People online? Okay. An act which wasn't in contradiction with his very strong affirmation of life throughout. You can't find a philosopher which was more keen to develop vitalism through studies of Spinoza, Bergson, Nietzsche, and so forth. And I want to start, and I'll go back to the Deleuze in a moment. I want to start with David Bowie. During the filming of David Bowie's Lazarus, a video for the song, which some of you might know, on his last album, Black Star, the doctors informed him that the cancer he had been suffering from was terminal, that they would discontinue treatment. The video features Bowie in close-up on his deathbed with a blindfold and buttons stitched over his eyes, aware of the impending death and seized by a desire to unleash his creativity for one last time. Look up here, I'm in heaven. I got scars that can be seen. I got drama, can be stolen. Everybody knows me now. Look up here, man, I'm in danger. I got nothing left to lose. I'm so high, it makes my brain whirl. Drop my cell phone down below. This way, oh no way. Oh, I'll be free. Just like that bluebird. Now ain't that just like me? In the last scene, Bowie walks backwards and locks himself in an empty, dark wardrobe. The image, at once moving, desperate, and full of vitality, recalls a historical precedent from 5 centuries earlier. I can't believe nobody spotted this. One of the ambitions of Renaissance poet and Dean of St. Paul's Cathedral in London, John Donne, was to die in the pulpit. He almost managed it. On February 25th, 1631, seriously ill, he got out of bed to preach his last sermon, the famous Death Duel. His appearance was ghastly and caused consternation among his hearers. A contemporary wrote that Dr. Donne had preached his own funeral service. He did not die in the pulpit, but found another way to turn his death into a work of art. He obtained a large wooden urn and a board. He undressed, put on the shroud, with knots tied to his head and feet, climbed onto the urn where he kept his balance while an artist drew his life-size portrait, which was then hung next to his bed to remind him what the future had in store and to show the courage and virtuosity with which he was facing it. Like Bowie, downstaged its own demise. John Donne, writes John Kerry, attained that command of death that the suicide aspires to. David Bowie's last album was released on his 69th birthday, January the 8th, 2016, 2 days before his death. We'll go back to John Donne later. For now, let me introduce my client, Raphael. Our session is early today, 8 a.m. on a Tuesday morning on a mid-November day. Unusually warm, the sky dense with clouds, autumn's beauty, a mixed blessing. Predictably, I think of that old song on my way to the clinic. Since you went away, the days were long, and soon I'll hear old winter's song. But I miss you most of all, my darling. When autumn leaves start to fall. At the start of every session, Raphael closes his eyes for a few minutes before speaking. But this time it takes him longer. The room feels too warm. I'll have to turn down the thermostat. There is an added layer to the silence. I keep my eyes half closed, waiting for him to speak. Ruby is away, he finally says. She left last Thursday to some exotic place in search of adventure, nature, and space away from her demanding schedule, sand and sea, etc. She won't be back for another week or so. For some reason, I'd forgotten where she was going. Of course, I have no problem with us being apart for a while. Matter of fact, it's a kind of good for us, you know. Still, I don't know what got into me. I don't know what's happening to me. It's like I don't really know Ruby, even though we've been together on and off for almost 4 years. And of course, it's complicated. I know it is. As you know, I was already in a relationship when we met, and I still am. I'm embarrassed to say this, but here it is. Where she is now, the kind of place, the sort of holiday, how can I say? I don't know. It doesn't square up with all our deep talks and with what I know of her. I'm embarrassed saying this, but this notion that I don't really know her derails me. I felt so down that this morning when I woke up, I thought that after all, if I decide to, exit this life, it wouldn't be such a crazy idea after all. It would make a lot of sense, especially if I consider, the uncertainty of my future in general after my diagnosis. I'm embarrassed, even ashamed, of being so shaken up by the fact that realizing I don't really know her just shatters me. Of course, as we both know, there are other issues at play, my early life, and an ancient feeling of abandonment. But at the moment, I just can't square up what I know of her with the choices she makes. Last time, after we made love, we cried our hearts out, reading Tsvetaeva's poem to Rainer Maria Rilke, who was well and truly dead by then. What's it like there, Rainer? How are you feeling? How does a poet's first sighting of the universe square with this his last glance at the planet. This planet you got only once. We read the poem and looked at the high white ceiling, so together, so alone in the world, abandoned in a good way, abandoned, surrendered for a brief moment to our love for each other. How was your trip, Reina? How did it tear, did you bear, did it burst your heart asunder, astride the finest Orlov racehorses? They keep up, you said, with the eagles. Was your very breath taken, or was it sweet? Do I seem distracted? No, impossible. No such thing as distraction from you. Every thought, do, Liebe, every syllable leads to you no matter what. Oh, to hell with the native tongue. I want the tongue of an angel. There is no place, no nest without you. Oh, wait, there is just one, your grave. Everything has changed, nothing has changed. You won't forget, I mean, not about me, what it's like there, Raina. How are you feeling? Anguish. You will never ask me again how to say nest in Russian. The soul nest, whole nest, nothing but the nest, sheltering a Russian rhyme with the stars. Raphael continued, reading Tsvetaeva through the tears who held each other like there is no tomorrow, as if the whole sky had flooded the room, as if nothing else mattered. It's fine, I should just calm the fuck down, you know? She's the friendly sort, the polite sort, and I'm a drama queen. Southern soul and all that. She sent me friendly messages, she usually does, and photos of the dogs, the house of friends where she stays. And then I had a meltdown after a difficult night. I felt so utterly desolate and abandoned. I felt all we had and shared had been brushed aside, that it didn't matter anymore, that I'm just one more name on a list of chores and social engagements. I ran her. She held me tenderly on WhatsApp. In the background, I could see the chairs in the living room lined with the Union Jack, but it doesn't matter. No, it doesn't. I felt heard. I felt understood. Long story short, I haven't slept all night. Getting out of the door to come to our session, I thought, what's the fucking point? I have lived, I have loved, I have severed the honey and the vinegar, the sweet, bitter taste of love. What's the point of going on living? I watched a Norwegian film the other night, Raphael tells me. It's called Oslo, August 31st. The protagonist, Anders, 30-something junkie, talented but disheartened writer, visits his old homes after a successful spell in rehab. Memories of an old love he had destroyed through his addiction to heroin. Failed attempts of finding her again. His state of mind is such that throughout the film, we don't know whether this is the first day of his new life or whether this is his last day on earth. Anyway, the last scene affected me deeply, Raphael says. Then he pauses. He is crying softly now, quietly. Sorry, he says. So, Anders visits his sister's empty apartment, sits at the piano, and plays some classical tune. Then, methodically, expertly, he prepares what is going to be his last fix. He draws the curtain, sits on the bed, and after injecting himself, he slowly, gently reclines on the bed. The film ends as it started, with loving, lingering shots of Oslo, the town Anders had loved. Well, Raphael says, after a pause, I thought, what an easy way to go. We sit in silence for what feels like a long time. I can hear Raphael drawing long breaths, and a sense of eerie calm envelops our session. I don't know who Ruby is, he says finally. nor do I know who I am. It's weird. When we are apart, which is most of the times given our circumstances, I feel she holds a part of me I can never access. Similarly, in her absence, I hold a part of her she'll never know. As I was listening to Raphael, as I listened to this, I thought of that song. I looked at life from both sides now, from winner and still somehow it's life's illusion I call. Really don't know life at all. Next. Several friends of mine are ill, some are dead. At your funeral, I thought of our last conversations. You would drift, doze, then wake up and apologize. We both glimpsed at the tree outside your bedroom window, autumn well on its way. We both wished we'd met earlier in our lives. You drank with relish the hot chocolate I brought, and it gave me pleasure to see you enjoying it, even though you would drift, forget to drink it, take another sip. How was your night? I spare you the details. I felt a beautiful sense of calm next to you, and so loved our conversation and learned from you. On the day before you died, I felt you had no fear, no hope. No hope, no fear. What an enviable way to live and die. Well, the cold black sea waits for me. The cold black sea waits forever. The waves hit the shore, cry for more. The cold black sea waits forever. Tornadoes come, up the coast they run. Hurricanes rip the sky forever. Though the weather's change, the sea remains the same. The cold black sea waits forever. There are ashes spilled through collective guilt. People rest at sea forever. Since they burnt you up, collect you in a cup. For you the cold black sea has no terror. No, the cold black sea waits for me. Cold black sea waits forever. When I leave this joint at some further point, the same cold black sea will be waiting. I want to make a distinction between biological, literal suicide and symbolic suicide. So literal suicide is when a person ends their own biological existence. Symbolic suicide is altogether something else. It's when a person destroys or escapes from their social identity or their position in society. This is not a literal death, but rather a social one. Symbolic suicide is an act of losing everything or withdrawing from symbolic reality that enables us to begin anew from 0 point, from the point of absolute freedom called by Hegel abstract negativity. Yet, despite the fact that symbolic suicide is not the act of ending one's biological life, it can just be as difficult. And I want to continue this thought and to also inquire into the nature of suicide, how it can be understood paradoxically in a positive way. And one of the inspiration is the Czech philosopher Jan Patočka, who was a pupil, personal friend of Husserl, also student of Heidegger, and who was forced to retire from the university, Charles University in Prague, for his political convictions, and died of a brain hemorrhage while under Czech police interrogation for having signed the Human Rights Manifesto, Charter 77. one of his collection of essays has been recently, well, not so recently, I think in the 90s, translated, Heretical Essays. So Patočka says, Platonic philosophers triumph over death in the sense that they don't run from it. They look it straight in the face. Their philosophy is meleted thanatu, concern for death, the concern of the soul inseparable from the concern for death, which becomes genuine concern for life. Life is born from this event of looking death in the face. In this sense, this is an act of freedom whose other facets are discipline and responsibility. If you're interested in this line of thought and in Patočka, the source here is Derrida, The Gift of Death. It's absolutely wonderful, wonderful book. But okay, to think of death in this sense, to be willing to look at death in the face, is an act of discipline and responsibility. It requires leaving behind the superficiality of the orgiastic dimension. What is the orgiastic dimension? It doesn't mean sex parties. It means the undifferentiated affect of the heart. And later, the development of the orgiastic dimension into what is technological proliferation. And I hope to explain why this is important. So, a move away from this orgiastic, herd-like superficiality, and a move away from the superficiality into which we are forced through technological proliferation. If I'm making it interrupt, feel free to interrupt.
Say orgiastic.
Orgiastic, yes, orgiastic. So this is an important movement away, and it's a Derrida would say it's a marriage of responsibility and faith. And this is where some theology, not so-called spirituality, but real theology and real religion has so much to teach us, particularly us who maybe identify as existential therapists, that often we are a sort of surrogate theologian. There's profundity in that, and also this liquid plate is also very interesting. Okay, why is this important? Following Plato's Phaedo, there's a quote in Plato says, the importance of gathering the mind, the soul rather, gathering itself into itself alone. What Derrida would call a subjectivizing interiorization. I'm of course doing acrobatics here because I'm forcibly bracketing away the fact that gathering itself into itself alone, the soul, means almost a separation from the body. And I have a serious problem with that. But let's, for a moment, entertain this idea. The person who is prepared in some way to face the reality of death, will gather their soul itself into itself alone. Let us say that this confrontation with death, this desire to look at death in the face, implies a move from exteriority to interiority. Exteriority here is not Levinasian exteriority, is not otherness, but understood as a dispersion, a destruction from the core. For a moment, let's say there is a core, there is a kernel, and a dissipation of this core, of this kernel, into the role that I am playing. Perhaps similar to, you could say, to Winnicott's notion of the false self. So, one of the effects of the triumph of the orgiastic dimension and the technological proliferation is that we moderns, we postmoderns, we postmoderns are no longer able to think in terms of a core. We are completely caught in the role. The role is as far as technological civilization can go in understanding subjectivity. This is the individualism of a persona, a character, not a person. A process which started from the Italian Renaissance, point made by the Swiss historian Jacob Burckhardt. A great inspiration for Nietzsche, will build some very strong, interesting stuff. But why am I mentioning all this? Not to sort of get too highfalutin and heterodyne, but simply to say, from that moment on, from the Italian Renaissance, to be an individual means to play a role and to forego, abandon our own secret, very important concept, secret individuality. Then, 2 centuries later, with the advent of the bourgeois revolution, liberté, égalité, fraternité, oh la la, and then still with the Algerian people and all segregated into banlieue, never mind. This notion of liberté, égalité, fraternité merged with this impaired, faulty, inferior notion of individuality, and it morphed into what we have now. A claim for the quantifiable, measurable equality, not of people, but the equality of roles. Here's Patočka. Okay, what would be the counter movement to this? And why does the prospect of suicide or the prospect simply of become acquainted with one's own death? Why is it important? Because we are forced. We are not forced. We are moving towards a connection with what Patočka calls a force which comes out of an extreme withdrawal of being. I'm not playing the game anymore. Fuck you, I'm going to top myself. Okay, so that would be the sort of, let's say, vulgar version of it. But there is a gardening into oneself where the role means nothing to me. You know, and the role that I myself have worked so hard in cultivating with, I'm a therapist, I'm this, I'm that, I'm writing this paper, that means fuck all. In actual moment of encounter with, Kierkegaard would say, with God, with Abraham encounter with God. Patočka again, force. This kind of force I'm talking about is thus found to be the most extreme withdrawal of being, which, like the letter searched for in the story of Edgar Allan Poe, the purloined letter, is nowhere in a more secure place than under one's very eyes. This is not something extraordinary. It's always present with us. It's just that, according to Patočka, we are constantly distracted by our role, that we are seduced and lured into, away from our, you could say, from our power. I think we shouldn't be afraid of that word, power, in that sense. So far, so good. It doesn't sound like a lot of hot air. Okay. Inspired by Eugene Fink, Patočka describes this move as one, I said this already, subordinating the justice, the superficial, to responsibility. Turning the gaze away from the Earth Mother. Sounds really uncool. How can you do that? Turning the gaze away from the Earth Mother, Derrida comments. Extracting oneself away from the mystery of the orgiastic towards what? Now, rationalist existential thinking would say non-mystery. Everything will be explained. When I'm dead, I will be. When death is, I am not. So why bother? There is no mystery. There is no subtlety. is simply straightforward, staring at the sun, having Yalom. Although I heard he has changed his mind on that view, but I remember his position was very much a radical rationalism. Why worry? Instead, the movement is away from the superficiality of the role, away from the mystery, because it's also a mystery in itself, this dimension of exteriority, towards not a non-mystery, but towards another mystery, from mystery to mystery, from the mystery of the exteriority to the mystery of a radical interiority. The radical interiority that arises when we are facing death. Or perhaps not so much the mystery, but to borrow Laplanche and to go more into the psychoanalytic, psychological terms, we're moving from one enigma, the enigma of existence, to the very personal enigma that I am carrying within me and that I don't know nothing about and that I will die without knowing. This enigma, or perhaps what Glisson would call opacity, a notion brilliantly expounded by Professor Rosie Risk a while ago from this very same platform. What is opacity? The enigma of my own being. What does it mean? Becoming acquainted and surrendering to my own irreducible unknowability, as well as surrendering to the sheer insolvability of human interaction. It doesn't sound like it sounds very strange for us therapists to have to surrender to our own unknowability and to the insolvability of human interaction. And finally, to surrender to what Derrida calls secretum, the secret, from the Latin secernere, to set apart. Here's Derrida. The secretum supposes the constitution of this liberty of the soul as the conscience of a responsible subject. It grants access to the, Derrida again, individualization of the relation to oneself. This individuality, this inner space, which I will never fully understand, is sacred. It is also secret. And it has to remain such. My client Raphael referred to the secrecy of his relationship with Ruby as sacred, a space where others had little or no access. He had mixed feelings about the fact that Ruby would regularly confide in her friends, especially Annie, about the comings and goings of their love, and that she would report back to him. He had no desire to interfere with their friendships, what was discussed. He understood Ruby's need to communicate about the ups and downs of their intense love for one another. But he also felt that the echo chamber of this conversation created another layer of difficulty and even hostility to an already fragile and, as he put it, sacred space the two of them shared. Of course, communication is a good thing. Communication clears the cloud, the Aufklärung, the enlightenment is of the reasonable, logical discourse can help us restore the mind to some degree of serenity, to some degree of sanity, purified by the excesses of mystical rapture. Similarly, with matters of the heart, a touch of reason, of communication, of logical interaction, of logos, dispassionate conversation with a friend lifts the lover from the magma of confusing passion. The problem, as we all know, arises from the fact that often reason gives way to rationalization and to the tyrannical demand for transparency. How do you define a tyrannical society? Derrida asked. By the demand for absolute transparency. And how do you define a democratic society? By the fact that it will protect the secret. It will protect the sacredness of the individual secret. Now, when I spoke about this the other day over lunch with my very dear friend Anastasios Gaitanidis, whom you all know, I believe, he said, uh-oh, you are moving closer to Heidegger. I can feel it more and more. I said, oh my goodness. Okay, so I don't know, it's an effect of old age, but let me move away from that danger. For me, that would be very dangerous. And let me recourse to some old accomplices of mine, Foucault and Deleuze. We're back to Deleuze. Okay. I don't think we are in the territory, although the territory is the same, but I'm not simply replicating Heidegger, the irreplaceability of design. In the end, all this design becomes the very important matter of my own death. Instead, I want to follow from Patočka and from Derrida this notion of radical subjectivity and to see whether Foucault can help us here. So what I'm saying is, how can we avoid all this talk about death, facing up to the reality of death, perhaps even thinking and wanting to commit, interesting word, suicide. How can we escape and return into the same old chestnut of individualism and subjectivity, of the heroic existential? Just I can face up that, you know. Now we spend a lifetime saying the Cartesian self is a construct. There is otherness. There is interdependence. There is plurality within the self. How do we end up to this point? How can we avoid going back into the old chestnut of subjectivity? Well, Foucault. The return to the figure of the self in the late Foucault is not a return to the subject. It's an unchanging subject to me. But instead, it folds, it presents a process. So it is not the subject that accompanies all its representation, but a specific event or movement that withdraws from the space of power by performing an operation, straddling, folding in such a way that is meant to affect itself. It sounds very abstract. Let me be more precise, or to try and be more precise. Partly what I'm doing here, I am simply presenting you with work in progress. So some of these things, if they sound strange or if they sound unconvincing, I would love you really get in there and critiquing, and let's have a discussion. So what am I talking about? Why is it different from, why this subjectivation in Foucault is different from the old chestnut of the Cartesian stuff? The help comes from Deleuze's interpretation of Foucault and the distinction between intensive modes and more personal modes. Let me find a quote. Deleuze, okay, he writes of active affections. There are affections of the self which draw on a power that no longer come from without. They are no longer connected with the exterior, with the contingency of good or bad encounters. but instead it's a way of living in which the individual mode feels itself less exposed to those and filled more and more by the intuition of itself as part of infinite power. Spinoza. Spinoza is behind this. So I no longer, in that decisive moment of facing up to my death, and here we're talking about Foucault in the last months of his life, when he knew he was dying of AIDS. In that intensity, there is a confrontation and an identification with a force which is individual, but is also part of infinite power. If this sounds theological, if this sounds downright religious, it's because it is. Because the inspiration here is Spinoza. So, in this sense, and this is an hypothesis, this different mode of subjectivizing is a different mode. It's a singular way of folding the force, which is an infinite force, bending it back onto itself in order, Deleuze, quote, in order to create a space to live and to breathe. Deleuze again. You have to manage to fold the line of the outside in order to constitute a livable zone where you can breathe. In other words, think, fold the line in order to be able to live on it. This is a life and death affair. This is a move away from superficial exteriority into an interiority which has a profound connection with power. Not power over others, but force, intensity. Again, Deleuze. He's writing about Foucault in Foucault's last year and his last lectures on the Collège de France. Quote, thought, Foucault says, has never been a theoretical matter. It was a matter of problems of life. It was the way Foucault get out this new crisis. He drew the line that allowed him to get out of it and to draw out new relations with knowledge and power, even if he had to die from it. That sounds stupid. It's not the discovery of subjectivation that made him die. And yet, the decision not to be always emits a dark glimmer of freedom. And it also can put us in touch with this interior but infinite force that we are normally avoiding to see because we are constantly, well, in my case, constantly on Facebook, promoting my next whatever, like this talk and the next book, or waiting to get a like from somebody I like and whatever. You see what I mean? So this withdrawal, radical withdrawal into oneself, which becomes paradoxical and intense in the person who is contemplating suicide, is very useful thing to consider. And it's very much connected to another part. Many of us, I'm assuming, have flirted with meditation, spirituality, whatever people call it nowadays. But at heart, to sit and meditate, at least in the Zen tradition, is to deliberately enter in the coffin. That's my definition of Zen practice. Enter the coffin. Die now, before your biological death, so that we can live more intensely, more fully. So the other thing, the other strand of thought that I want to bring in is the freedom to choose death. Primo Levi, suicide is an act of will, a free decision. When he died, he fell from the stairs of his flat in Turin. And some people like Tim Parks said it was a suicide. Some people were incensed, insulted by Primo Levi, a great moral writer. How dare you say that he killed himself? There was obviously an accident. There was a whole conversation, I remember, way back in the New York Review of Books. And the response was for one thing, Primo Levi wasn't your sort of writer who would offer consolation. He would, again, look at the reality of life and death with the face. So the fact that he might have killed himself in no way detracts from his great work. Similarly, with Pasolini, a great inspiration in my life. If you haven't seen his films or read his book, his poetry, I strongly recommend it, because it would be a real antidote to the bullshit that has been now taught in many places around the country, in London, in the name of existential therapy. I mean, the mind boggles. Pasolini, the freedom must include the freedom to choose death. Also, death is very important because it creates, he was a filmmaker, a montage, the editing, the unquote from heretical empiricism, the untranslatable chaos of possibility becomes suddenly crystallized and clear. I am zooming through this because I want to have more of a discussion. And I wanted to, again, these are strands that I want to add to this conversation, hopeful conversation, rather than this meandering monologue. I read a bit of the last moment of a dear friend of mine who died. He wanted me to look for the Zen poems. Knew of my lifelong practice and interest in Zen, so we looked at death poems. And there's a long tradition in that. And my favorite is by a great Chinese teacher called Tendo Nyongjo. So a Zen practitioner, a Zen master, let's say, the word is got out of fashion, but a Zen accomplished practitioner is asked to write a poem before their death. And this is what Tendo Nyongjo wrote. He was 66. 66 years. I've been piling up sins. Now I'm ready to leap into hell. Deleuze. Back to Deleuze. Deleuze's life was often synonymous with vulnerability and fragility. Quote, in life, there is a sort of awkwardness, a delicacy of health, a frailty of constitution, a vital stammering, which is someone's charm. It is perhaps in this same frailty and stammering that the possibility of innovation and creation is anchored. I am not peddling for a minute the idea that to produce something creative and innovative, you need to be a tortured artist, or you need to be in touch with some kind of inner frailty. But it would be awkward, particularly in our neo-positivist era, where people are sent to therapy in order to be fixed and sorted, and to have nowadays their trauma sorted by incredibly lucrative industries of gurus who all, they can fix your trauma over the weekend by a simple connection with your attachment styles and whatnot. So it is refreshing to read Deleuze saying that life itself has an intrinsic fragility, and that the fragility might be connected to creative innovation, including in our strange field of psychotherapy, and I would say philosophy. Again, this is found in beautiful conversations called dialogues. There are several books, 1 and 2. It is strange how great thinkers have a fragile personal life, an uncertain health, at the same time as they carry life to the state of absolute power of great health. People say, I have a lifelong passion for Nietzsche. Oh yeah, but he died young, didn't he? And he was mad, wasn't he? I don't think it's so fucking what? He died at 54 and produced one masterpiece after another. And the so-called Übermensch, the so-called overhuman, Superman, is precisely that experience of limited experience of knowing this threshold of life and death and profound fragility. In Japan, my teacher's teachers, Maizumi Roshi used to say, it's always the tallest tree that gets the storm. The more you try to understand and innovate and create, the more fragile you become. We are not talking here about so-called post-traumatic growth. That's for carrots. It's not for humans. We are humans, I would like to remind you. And then, there's so much more. When I first decided I should be a therapist, let me read. I read the whole of James Hillman in his fantastic book, Suicide and the Soul. I said, wow, this is what they do in psychotherapy training. And then I went. And it was absolute bollocks what I was being told. There was nothing. Look, listen to this. Listen to James Hillman. We have an analyst, a psychotherapist, has to consider philosophy as the first step in the struggle with the suicide problem. We should learn, discuss, and understand philosophy, because philosophy's fundamental question is a response to the grave matter of life and death. It's not ontotheology, Eigentlichkeit, or the sort of absolute nonsense that's being taught in the bulletproof thing, in places like the New School of Psychotherapy and Counseling, God help us, or Regent's College, is a very direct question. So, and here is Hillman again. Until we can choose death, we cannot choose life. Until we can say no to life, I don't want it. There's a freedom in that. There is a defiance. As a defiance, I say, life? I don't want it. Until I can reach that point, I have not even begun to say yes to life. Unless for life, I mean the next little candy that I'm looking forward to. Yes. Oh, yes, I'm being optimistic. I'm going to have another little piece of candy. And that will keep me going. So, let me close this random thing with John Donne, which absolutely blew me away, this man and his poetry. And I won't say much, but he proposed something scandalous. Not only was a real sort of a playboy turned theological firebrand and whatnot, but he suggested, first of all, he wrote a whole treatise, Biothanatos, in favor of the notion of suicide, in favor of the liberating force of saying, fuck it, I don't want this. And secondly, he suggested something which sounds scandalous now. I can't imagine our current Archbishop of Canterbury saying, perhaps the previous Archbishop of Canterbury can imagine saying, It's no scandal because it was already in Thomas of Aquinas. Christ, Jesus Christ, the great historical example of a suicide. He wanted to die, and he did it. Could he have? You could twist that. You can turn it as you want. You can say, yes, it confirms that Christianity is a life-denying death cult. They're fixated on this cross rather than thinking of Jesus' revolutionary teaching, his wonderful compassion and piety, etc. Or you could say, with George Bataille. I don't know if you ever have come across George Bataille. I strongly recommend you read George Bataille, but be careful because it will derail you completely. George Bataille would say, and this is also Christian, and this total Christianity is on here. The final word is Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. Father, why you forsake me? It doesn't sound like the final surrender. Thy will be done. And hunky-dory and eat your Easter cake after resurrection. It's the most profound abandonment. But maybe there is something good about abandonment. Maybe there is something good into that state of mind of the person. By the way, I'm not advocating suicide, right? But the person who comes close to thinking, you know what? Maybe I can do it. Maybe it would be a good thing. There is a depth and intensity there, which is really, really a desire for an intense life, a desire for a life that would sustain the intensity of what Nietzsche called the eternal recurrence. Can this square up with a psychotherapy which is meant to be at the moment another form of hygiene and policing? I doubt it. But I'm grateful that we can talk about these things without being, I don't know, considered nuts. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. So, comments, questions?
Manu, I'm getting married next year, and something you said, many things you said I found really evocative. But one thing about the secrecy between two people, and that really struck a chord with me about some anxiety I have around everyone seeing us on the day of our marriage, and the extremely personal and secret, very complex thing that we have. Don't know if that makes sense to you.
Yeah. I think, again, I'm reminded of Bataille, the community of lovers. It belongs only to the lovers. It doesn't belong to anybody else. It doesn't belong to the insurance clerk. It doesn't belong to the police. But nowadays, when two people are entering a bedroom, the insurance clerk is just around the corner, because there might be a possible formal complaint. So that secrecy is a beautiful thing. You are apprehensive about it. That apprehension, perhaps, if I understand you correctly, shows that there is something of value, of weight. It's not just
maybe it's not what you're talking about. Yeah. There's also, marriage is a form of death, isn't it? Sort of death of a single life. People come to witness. Maybe not what either you were talking about.
More what you were talking about. There's something in nature, isn't there, about people who don't speak the name of their God because there's something too sacred about it.
Yeah.
No reason why they don't want to say that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. Wonderful.
There's also the apophatic.
What's that?
There's also the apophatic tradition,
Yes.
the via negativa. So
Via negativa. Yes, yes.
whatever you try and define God with,
Yeah.
Sorry, Eric, whatever you try and define.
whatever you say of God, he isn't.
Right.
Right.
I was curious.
Yeah.
You use the words affect,
Yes.
power, force. Are you using them synonymously as affect, or are you differentiating?
That's a work in progress for me. I'm obsessed with affect. At the moment, I'm facilitating a whole course on this, and as a way to find out what it is. I think, I don't know if they're the same, but they have a similarity in the sense of what Terry would say. They traverse the subject, they traverse the person. And in the end, is what matters. That we are open to that force. I don't usually use the word force. Force is the word Patočka and Derrida use. It's new to me. Yeah.
So what I found interesting in because you've formulated something about affect which is expressed outside of the world of representation.
Okay.
It's almost sort of it's translating into some kind of invisible realm, which is an inward journey. I don't know if I'm making sense.
That's where it's going, but I'm a little bit suspicious of that because then it becomes the ineffable, numinous, something before cognition, and I'm not.
You know, it's interesting you're saying that because yesterday I was listening to a talk on the Hellenic tradition.
Yes.
And the writings of Plotinus and so on, where
Yeah.
the nous or nous precedes logos even.
Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I'm drawn to that kind of romantic notion before cognition, but I'm suspicious of it as well.
Sure.
I kind of like your suspicion of it. I mean,
Yeah.
and I think I'm suspicious of it too.
Yeah.
Can be too packed.
I find myself thinking that there might be a way of not doing it, but it probably takes you too close to Heidegger. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I think that there's this idea that the self gathers itself to itself, or something like that. But there's something Kierkegaard says, that the self is a relation that relates to itself, or something like that.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm thinking, rather than withdraw, why rather than radical withdrawal, why not something like radical engagement?
I like it. I think bringing Kierkegaard really helps because I can't believe I didn't bring him in before. So thank you for that. I think it's very much close to that.
What I think you might not like is Heidegger stuff about. Well, you see, I think people like Simon Critchley say that what Heidegger is doing in that death chapter has something to do with he's just Dasein's preoccupied with its own death. Certainly, he seems to be saying that Dasein's one's own death is radically different from other people's death.
Yes.
But Dasein is a Mitsein, is a being with other people. So other people's death is something that affects Dasein. You know? So I don't think Heidegger I don't think Critchley's right about that. I think he's anyway. But that's why I think what Anastasia said is very interesting.
Yeah.
That Heidegger, I think, is trying to say something about how we get caught up in the conversation we have with other people, and this stuff about idle talk. We just say things to each other. And he's trying to say something about us falling out of that conversation into something else.
Yeah.
something which perhaps is a bit more sort of serious and more, more worrying. Anyway, so I'm trying to think about that, of course, as related to the conversation we have with ourselves.
Maybe it should be more transparent, despite all this secrecy and opacity. About I started this whole thing as an act of defiance, saying this only belongs to me. This only belongs to me. And the moment I will, my own life circumstances, if I decide to come close to the thoughts, it only belongs to me. The objection to that is that the person or persons I love, which I thought, as I said in relation to my client, they hold a part of me which I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, my death belongs to them.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't belong to me. My death belongs to the person who loves me. It's not fully, it sounds a bit strange, but it's not fully formulated. So the whole otherness, the whole, maybe Levinas would be into that. That's how I would escape that kind of defiance with, which could become individualistic.
Manu, let alone trying to get my head around your talk, I'm also trying to get my head around Blanchot.
Ah,
And
wonderful stuff.
there seems to be some correspondences in what you're saying with the way Blanchot looks at both suicide, ethics, in context of literature. And, you know, his expression of the impossibility of the possible. So I'm not sure where that's going, but you're seeming to be pointing at something in that direction somehow.
Yeah, I have to go back to Blanchot.
He talks about suicide as well.
Inexhaustible. But the first connection for me was absence.
Sorry?
Absence. What's the power of that withdrawal? It's the power of absence, which is the very opposite of being constantly online. It's I'm not here. And by not being here, I don't know, something else. I don't know.
I mean, in terms of his literature, he disappeared.
Exactly.
As the author.
Yes, indeed. There's only 2 photos of Blanchot.
Yeah.
In the act of not being there,
Yes.
it might make one very aware in others.
Yeah.
Were you saying that this particular thing was inspired by what you're going through personally?
Yes. With some overlapping with clinical work, personal, all mixed. Yeah.
Yes.
I was, I'm sorry, someone talking. I don't know if I'm just not hearing you. Sorry.
Go on.
No, I've had about a million thoughts. I've got no idea what to say. I thought of Kierkegaard, and I thought, isn't Kierkegaard in love, and he gave up the love of his life rather than marrying her? Something about marriage, and I thought of Kierkegaard. But I was thinking about sacrifice, and what you said about Jesus, and this idea of, do you sacrifice the self or do you sacrifice society? And then this secrecy, this giving your source away, that when you give it language, or you define it, or you give it words, do you kill it off in some way? And something about your singing, when you were singing, I could see you in your kitchen for some reason. I had a picture of you in your kitchen, and I felt a very kind of intimate, private moment that you gave without defining, without telling. Obviously, I don't know if you're in the kitchen or if you're in the garden, wherever you are. But I just thought there was something really interesting about that, because there was a sense without you saying it. I had a sense of something in your singing, which I thought was quite interesting. And I just was curious what made you want to sing rather than speak. That was my question, really, and a few little thoughts.
I don't know if I have a straight answer, but some of this, as Eric was saying, affect, I feel it can only be expressed by a flight. Sometimes when I am overwhelmed by feeling and emotion and affect, it has to go into song. I used to be a singer. I'm sort of basically a failed rock star, you could say. So there's but yeah, I've been singing in my kitchen living room for the last few days, thinking of this, and I'm thinking, no, it sounds it's a bit weird. But I said no, but I think it would be making the point more clear. So it's like you can't to make it less flat, to allow it to take flight.
Yeah, and maybe that's what I meant by sometimes the words, they can kill off some of that emotion, tone it down, contain it, put it into something. And that's a restriction, a restrictive process, you know. It's not thinking of Henry Bergson, you know, creative evolution, and just something about releasing as opposed to containing and holding and restricting.
Yeah, and also maybe like you were asking earlier, you know, being to this friend, seeing him in the last days of his life, and also being in his funeral at the wake, song became a very important part of the way we mourn him. So I kind of wanted to bring that as well in an indirect way, without making it too confessional. And poetry as well. I mean, Cetaiva, I don't know if you read the New Year poem to Rilke. Absolutely breathtaking.
I was thinking when you were singing, you know, I enjoyed your singing very much.
Thank you.
But I was thinking when you were singing, there's something about the breath of life. And that's why it's important.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. The breath of life is maybe just my personal sense of my experience of music, because I'm a singer as well. Maybe something of a failed, but I'm okay, you know. So without going into that, there's something about how there's also in that kind of intense presence that I find an intensely present experience that I have with music, a bit like the Zen thing and the meditation. There's also like when I say a denial of what's to come, isn't it? For me,
A denial
of future. And for me, maybe this is just how I related to music. So you can tell me if this is not what you experience it to be, but how it brings me so into the present that it shuts down any thoughts of the future. It is a kind of a defiance, and you're talking of a defiance a lot. And I don't know how to say this. I wonder for you if there is in what you're going through, you're trying to deny it a bit in your defiance.
Maybe at times.
Yeah.
But it's more like what's missing. And that the formula, no hope, no fear. What's missing? Okay, let's say this is paradoxical. Let's say you have a death sentence. No, maybe it's a crappy example. Hope and fear and the future brings in a whole dimension, which is sometimes unnecessary, because really what's missing. And to see my own friend die in a complete, in a place of no hope, no fear, without fireworks, without spiritual quotes, without just very, very, very ordinary, very at peace with that. I said, wow.
I think you're talking about how kind of infinitely kind of implicit, you know, how it's always going to be both. You're saying hope and fear.
Or are you saying the confrontation? Sound like your friend, I mean, it doesn't sound like a confrontation, it sounds more like
Yeah.
yeah.
But the question is, it's also a Zen question. What's missing? There's a famous Zen dialogue which is often used in the tradition as a mode of inquiry, existential inquiry. And this is going to sound very weird. The head monk goes to Joshua, the abbot of the monastery. Says, Joshua, there is a beggar at the door. What should we do? And he says, what's missing? What's missing? There are many stories also of a person who lives for years in the street, and he doesn't know that while he was asleep, drunk asleep, somebody has sewn a pearl inside his cloth. So on one level, what's missing? This existence. What else do we want? This is pretty phenomenal, isn't it? It's pretty weird to be in this body, to be walking around, to wake up in the morning. Another friend of mine who died sadly young, not too long ago, seems to be, it's just like somebody said, they drop, after a certain age, people begin to drop like flies. He was amazed that he was waking up every morning. So, what's missing? It doesn't, of course, there can be better, more. Of course, if I'm stuck, I want to improve my life. Of course, if I'm dependent, I want to become independent. But on a basic level, existence, what's missing? Am I making sense or just?
Well, it's making me think.
I mean, coming out of let's say, I don't know if you have experienced or friends have experienced that they've been admitted to hospital for 2 weeks, difficult procedure. Just coming out of that, just let's say it's the most shitty, rainy, cold English day. How absolutely wonderful. What's missing? I'm alive, it's raining. Just go and have a cup of coffee somewhere. It doesn't matter if it's lousy. As an example I always love is the sequel to Wings of Desire. You know, Vendors. Wings of Desire. The angel becomes a human. He's drinking this lousy coffee from a kiosk in Berlin on a very cold day. And he burns his lips because he's still not human. He's just half angel, half human. And it's absolutely, the coffee is lousy. It's a cheap kiosk in Berlin. The weather is foul. An absolute joy to be in the body, to be in the senses. You know, that sort of thing. I mean, people have, some of my friends have heard this many times, just draw on about it. But it moves me to tears, as an example. And still, there is shit in the world, you know. Dubai, great meeting to improve, to save the planet.
Wow.
Give me a fucking break.
Yeah.
You know, this stuff that still makes one angry. But at the same time, what's missing?
I was very moved by your talk.
Thank you.
And I could hear the personal in it.
Yeah.
And
Am I giving myself away? Sorry.
well, I could hear it. I may have been projecting something onto that, but I'm glad that you did sing, and I'm glad for the paper. I've heard you talk a number of times before, but I once heard you sort of tell the story of Kaiser Gotami
Yeah.
many years ago, before your
You want to tell that story? It's absolutely always breaks.
Oh my God, I'll butcher it. No, no way. I'm not gonna.
Okay.
But please, you told it so well. If you want to.
Especially now. Don't carry on.
Yeah. I was intrigued and I went and I looked for it. I forgot it for a while and then it kept coming back and I went searching for it. And but I think my point is, in all the different times I've heard you talk, this was the first time I kind of got the most personal.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm very thankful for it because of my own journey and angst and questions about and anxiety about death and living, and very soothing, and thank you.
I was really interested in,
Yeah.
you sort of said something around creativity,
Yes.
a longing for or wanting a better life, and the links between the two, and how people are intense if they want to kind of consider the thoughts of ending their life, and they get to that place that they're longing for, wanting something intense, something bigger, and somehow that was linked to people who are creative. And I wanted
People
who are creative. I wanted to just ask you to kind of flesh that out a little bit for me and tell me what the link is in that way.
I'm not sure what the link is, but for me, I'm always drawn to I've always been drawn to artists to come close to the edge, and it seems, but also I'm not. It's a tricky one because I don't want to defend a position. Now, some people would say, "Oh, but you talk about all these things, you know, but you live a comfortable life. So what?" But okay, it seems that okay, maybe the useful word is the limit experience, which is something Blanchot talks about, something Bataille talks about. The limit experience, let's say it could be because you're suffering an incredible amount of sort of pain and anguish and separation and desolation, and you reach a particular point, and there is a shattering of the self, and then the creative work in some of these people. I'm thinking of Bataille again. I'm thinking of Rimbaud, Artaud, and all people at the edge really. The work becomes a way to survive and to express, almost to you could say, to bank on the experience of the self-shattering. But there can also be a positive experience. It could be maybe through prayer, meditation, solitary walks, through lovemaking. You reach again this limit. And I don't mean a peak necessarily, but a limit that forces you to look at your own life in a slightly different way for a moment. It seems that that intensity brought into the creative work Francis Bacon. People prefer talking in his iPad, art, whatever. Fine. It's nice and pleasant. He's a great artist. But Francis Bacon, wonderfully disturbing. So it may be just a personal taste. It may be just what helped me in my life to create my own idiom, my own language. But I found those experiences, those testimonies in art, in literature, very, very useful. I say, okay, so you're not supposed to simply fall apart.
Right.
You can fall apart and then come up with something, with a form of communication,
of sharing.
Which I agree with.
I'm rambling a lot, but I'm not sure.
Well, I think that's right. I think there's kind of a, in creativity, it's almost opposite to death. In the sense that you're giving birth to something, creating something that's not of yourself, but not your whole self.
Yeah.
And in a sense that, I'm interested in that link and the way that can therefore help find that kind of.
Yes.
That's kind of what you're saying.
Yeah. And maybe can that creativity also be part of our practice as therapists? That would be the challenge, the interesting thing. If some of us have been at some point in our lives, which I'm sure we all have been somewhere around to the limit. Okay, what can we remember that sort of tender place and work from that at times?
Can I squeeze in a final question?
Yeah.
Can I squeeze in a final question? If there is no afterlife whatsoever, which is my conclusion, but if there is absolutely no afterlife whatsoever, is there any point in committing suicide because you're simply not there to enjoy the cessation or the peace or whatever you committed suicide for?
I'm non-committal on that. I remember my Zen teacher doing a funeral service and saying to the guy who had died, "We don't know where you are." So I have no idea. It doesn't even compute in my head what you're asking, because I'm not, I don't know.
But for the person who commits suicide, is there any point for them because they're not there to enjoy what they're committing suicide for?
So you're presenting suicide as a kind of investment of some sort?
No, an escape.
Okay. Okay. I don't know if maybe somebody can answer better than me. I really can't answer this question. Maybe Dell, maybe anybody.
The question is, is there any point committing suicide because you're missing out on the experience of dying and death? Something like that, is it? Is that the question?
No, it's not missing out the experience of dying, it's missing out of not existing. If there's no afterlife,
maybe I've just not taken it as literally.
Because you're not to enjoy not existing.
Wasn't there great?
It sounds like
Was there not something Manu was saying about the decision to do it? It's less about once you're in it or not in it, let's say, but the decision that you get to the point of saying, that's it, done. Whether it's symbolic or turns literal, but I think there's something in the moment of deciding something like that. That's either a release, an expression, or a want or a desire, whatever it might be. It's an action. It's rather than the actuality.
Yeah, it was the gathering up of the self.
Okay. Yes.
I thought I was hearing nothing to do with the life after or whatever, but much more to do with philosophy as learning how to die.
Yeah.
And the idea of, you said it in relation to the film, I think there's something about living like is it the first day of his life or the his last day on earth?
Yes.
And the idea is, I think, partly about how those two things might be pushed together in a way.
Yes.
And and so I thought you were probably saying something closer to what Nietzsche gets up to. That Schopenhauer paper, the paper that says basically artists alone are sort of show us something about not conforming in a way, and that conformity is a kind of death.
Yeah.
So you're talking about a kind of life in that sort of way.
Yes. I would very, very much.
Right? Talking about living in, was it too Heideggerian, about living inauthentically by denying the limits of life, the human condition.
I would I would instead bring again Foucault and says, what does it mean to be with that intensity, with that active affect, Deleuze would call it, that quickens the life. It's not so much about owning it, but more about allowing the self to be moved and traversed by this intensity. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it's a different language to say the same thing, but I'm not sure if it's the same thing. You know.
Well, we're over time. So, I mean, thanks for what, you know, what's saying is just, you know, something for us to, I don't know, breathe more easily or creativity, but it would include our last breath as well.
Yeah,
so thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Lovely to be here again.
Can I just say our next speaker is Jake Osborne, who will be coming on the 1st of February and looking at authenticity with Heidegger and Freud. Yeah? So that's getting us into next term. Many thanks. Thanks to our visitors here. We're taking a break now till 8 o'clock when our training here will continue. Many thanks for everyone for coming in.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.